Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to start the event today with a land acknowledgement, the West Hartford Land Acknowledgement, and Heather Angel is going to read it to you.
Canupium, welcome. Ascowiquasanitops. I'm saying to you in my language, hello, friends and neighbors. We acknowledge that the town of West Hartford resides on the ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples and tribes, past and present, including, but not limited to, the Paquotnuck, Wungunk, and Tuxus. We honor and respect these stewards of the land and recognize the displacement and hardships they have faced and continue to endure. We honor the rich history, culture, and traditions of Indigenous peoples, recognizing that this acknowledgement serves as a reminder of the importance of respecting and uplifting the voices and cultures of Native Americans and Indigenous peoples in all aspects of their lives. We honor the sovereignty, resilience, and lived experiences of all Indigenous peoples, inviting this community into a deeper process of healing, education, stewardship, and shared responsibility for the land that we all inhabit. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather Angel. Is this working?
Yeah. Yes.
So again, welcome everybody. I'm Judy Wyman. I'm a West Hartford resident. And about 10 years ago, I was serving on the West Hartford Human Rights Commission, and some high school students approached us, asking for help to eliminate the high school mascots, the chieftains and the warriors. We did help them, but we were unprepared for the intensity of the conflict that would ensue. It was clear that Indigenous voices and education needed to be strengthened and amplified in our community. Since that time, I've made an effort to do just that, and thanks to many partners, such as the people presenting today, Leah and Maura of the library, and Adrian at Town Hall, we have had a wide assortment of excellent programs and events. Most recently, I heard that West Hartford was forming a committee to plan for the America 250 birthday. I signed up to help ensure that Indigenous voices would be represented, and appropriately so. And I'm thrilled that we have 4 events scheduled during these months leading up to July 4th. 2 have already happened. We launched the West Hartford America 250 program with Indigenous dancing at Town Hall in October. In November, this library showed the film Gather, followed by a Q&A session. And by the way, the Indigenous dance performance was recorded by WHCI, the Community Interactive Channel, and it's available on their YouTube channel. Today, the third event is this amazing panel about Ancestral Echoes, epigenetics, Indigenous resilience, and environmental justice. And on Thursday, April 23rd at 6 p.m., we will be holding a panel discussion at King Philip Middle School called King Philip's War and Indigenous Voices Today, Past, Present, and What Our Nations Continue to Teach. With many thanks to Heather Angel Mars Martin, who just read us the land acknowledgement, the panel will consist of 3 New England tribal members and will be moderated by Stephen Pivar, a West Hartford attorney who has represented Indigenous tribes for decades. Both today's program and the one in April will be filmed by WHCI, so the recordings will be available on their YouTube channel. And thank you to WHCI for being here today. So before I present the panelists, I also want to thank the library for hosting this event, and a special thank you to our presenters who have worked hard putting together an amazing program for you. Each presenter will speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a short break and then open it up to questions at the end. Thank you. So we'll start with Dr. Bevan Rainwater. And each panelist will introduce themselves.
OCO, and welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Bevan Rainwater. I am a staff and faculty member at the University of Hartford, and I teach Native American cultures. There, I am a co-chair of the Amplifying Indigenous Voices Affinity Network, and also serve on the West Hartford Indigenous Voices Task Force. It is my pleasure to be here to speak with you all today. Mine is talking about the environmental root, water stress, and the biological memory of a people. And I want to say Oseo again. That word Oseo is how my Cherokee relatives have greeted each other for centuries. It is a simple, ancient thing, and today I'm going to argue that it carries biological weight, that the act of cultural greeting itself, of belonging, is a form of medicine, but we will get there. First, I need to ask you to do something very difficult. I need you to figure out everything that you think you know about your DNA. Today I'm going to cover the myth of the fixed blueprint, why DNA is a library, not a blueprint, the science of it, the 3 pillars of proof, the Dutch hunger winter, the cherry blossom ice, and Native history. 3, water as the molecular messenger. I'm going to talk about the Navajo Nation, the Laguna Pueblo, and Turtle Mountain. And 4, culture as molecular medicine, resilience, ceremony, and water sovereignty. And lastly, talking about 7th generation legacy and what we write into the DNA of those not yet born. Raise your hand if you've ever been told diabetes runs in your family, or that's just how your people are. The doctrine of genetic determinism teaches you that you are dealt a hand of cards and you play them until the game is over. For Indigenous communities, this framework is not just incomplete, it is dangerously so. I argue that DNA is a library, and it's very fitting that we're in a library today. DNA is the hardware, the fixed text, the biological infrastructure. The software is epigenetics. That's the librarian deciding which books are read and which stay locked away. Then we have the programmer, which is your environment around you, the water, your air that you breathe, your land, your stress. These things reprogram your body. The text never changes, but what is read by your system changes everything. Let's take a look at the Dutch hunger winter. In 1944, Nazi-imposed regime in the occupied Netherlands, pregnant women were starved, basically, and survived on less than 500 calories a day. The starving body then chemically tagged fetal DNA with a message saying the world is a place of scarcity, store every gram of fat. I'm sorry for my typos. The result was that decades later, even when raised in abundance, grandchildren showed elevated rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. The conclusion was that methylation, marks persisted 60 years post-famine mode by these women. Then we have the cherry blossom mice, another experiment. Male mice were exposed to cherry blossom scent and a mild foot shock, and they learned to fear the scent. The unexpected finding was that offspring and grandchildren of the mice shuddered at the shock or at the scent despite never feeling a shock themselves. Brains were physically rewired with more detection neurons. Trauma was archived in the sperm's epigenetic markers, not in the DNA sequence itself. And ancestral memory then is considered a molecular neuroscience. Now I want you to think of something your grandmother taught you, not a lesson, but something physical. The way she tensed in a storm, the way she held her breath when certain people entered the room. And just hold that thought for a moment. Can you guys think of anything? Okay. I'm going to talk about the Native connection now. Our cherry blossom moment is not a scent. It is the creak of a government wagon, the sight of a boarding school, the sound of a language being beaten from a child's mouth. Skeptics ask, that was 150 years ago. Why can't you move on? Scientific answer is because my body has not forgotten those things. The Trail of Tears, the long walk, was starvation, was the policy. It was not the side effect. My great-great-great-grandparents were on the Trail of Tears and were moved forcefully from Tennessee, and Mississippi to what is now Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. They were starving, they were walking in the cold in winter. That lives on in the memory of my family. My grandmother was diabetic. I am in turn diabetic. That starvation mode is still there. It's passed down from generation to generation. This rate of type 2 diabetes is partly famine software. Now I want you to think about where you grew up. Think about the water where you grew up. Did you trust the water? Did your parents say, don't drink from that tap, don't swim there, don't eat fish in that river? Did anybody have any of these going on when you were a kid? Let's look at a couple cases. There are certainly more than this. This is going on all over Indian country and all over other communities here in the United States, but I'm going to pull out 3 cases. The first is the Navajo Nation. The U.S. extracted uranium from the Dene Biké for its nuclear program, but when the mines were closed, they never did cleanup. They just left the contamination there. 30% of Navajo households have no running water, no potable water. They have to go sometimes hours away to haul water to their households, and that water is poisoned by uranium and arsenic. Arsenic is a chemical epigenetic disruptor and acts like a whiteout on the markers that keep genes regulated. The impact is that pregnant women, their exposure silences stress regulation genes in the fetus, and that's before the child even draws their first breath. Then let's look at the Laguna Pueblo people. The Jackpao-Pacuate mine, once the world's largest open-pit uranium mine, has radioactive remnants that continue to leach into the watershed. The mechanism here is that chronic contamination creates allostatic load time, and the compounding physiological cost is a form of environmental stress on the people. For pregnant women, this creates a sustained cortisol bath for the developing fetus. The chemical signal that's sent to the fetus is that the world outside is hostile. The impact is that children are born with a hypersensitive stress response system contributing to elevated hypertension, anxiety, and immune dysfunction. And last, let's look at the Turtle Mountain Chippewa. Flint was the headline. Everybody knows what happened in Flint, Michigan, right? The water was poisoned. But did you hear about Turtle Mountain? No. The failing infrastructure is a pattern. Dozens of tribal nations have aging pipes and lead-laden water. Lead is a neuroepigenetic disruptor as well. It targets the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. It methylates and silences the genes that regulate neurological development. Lead does not destroy the library. It locks the doors to the most important rooms in that library. So it's shutting off portions of your brain that are processing things. Underfunding tribal water infrastructure is not neglect. It is locking the genetic potential of Native children before they even enter a school. There are other stories as well. Oil spills across the country affecting Alaskan communities. Water being poisoned along the shoreline by plastics and things like that, affecting the animals and also the people in those areas. I could go on. I'm going to argue that cultural as a molecular medicine is resilience, ceremony, and epigenetic sovereignty. Epigenetics is reversible, completely reversible. Sustained environmental change can rewrite toxic survival messages. Emerging science confirms that Indigenous people have always known that culture, ceremony, language, and community itself are medicine. Cultural connectedness reduces cortisol levels, improves immune markers, and yields better health outcomes. I want you to turn to a person near you for about 30 seconds and answer in one sentence. What is one thing your community does together that makes you feel safe? It could be a meal, a gathering, a practice, and a place.
Right. And
started this in October. And I first would in once a month, and cry once for once, and I would just say twice. And then some just emails of things, now
I hear some great conversations going on, but we're going to circle back. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Bevan.
Water sovereignty is epigenetic sovereignty. Fighting for clean water is not just about hydration. It's about the right of our children to be born into an environment that signals safety rather than danger, abundance rather than famine, belonging rather than threat. Cleaning a river is a molecular intervention. Protecting an aquifer is resetting stress response system. And holding polluters accountable is reclaiming genetic libraries. Now the seventh generation legacy, what we write into the DNA of those not yet born. I want you to think of one concrete thing in your home, your community, your work, to make sure the molecular message is passed to the next generation is one of safety rather than of threat. You don't have to say it out loud, just think on it for a second. What is one thing that you can do? The root determines the tree. The poisoned root here on the left is that we have always survived, but survival is not the ceiling of what we deserve. The inputs such as uranium, arsenic, lead, oil, plastics, these are the cortisol of colonial stress. We want the nourished root. We want the library to be open. We want the books to come down from the shelves and to be shared with our communities. These require clean water, language, ceremony, and sovereignty. And this is seventh generation thinking. What we do is for the benefit of the 7 generations that come after us. Wado, I'm Dr. Bevan Rainwater. If you have any questions, you can contact me, but we're gonna have a little Q&A at the end, and I'm gonna pass it on to Heather Angel.
Askoikwasin Nutatuis. My name is Nishwikwani Kawesa Kitampanisha At Mishki Kwaneki Kasechim Kawawe. I am third daughter, Morning Sunrise, of Red Doe and Chief Sachem Long Pine. That would be Diana and David Maas of Charlestown, Rhode Island, where I was born and raised, right on ancestral lands of our family since time immemorial. I am also currently a tribal government leader for the Narragansett Tribal Nation. I am a loved wife. I have a wonderful husband and a beautiful family, and my children have blessed us with 5 grandchildren. So when we think of the next several generations, I have them in mind and what's to come from all of them. And it is an honor for me to be in what I call prestigious company with both Bevan and Cassandra, and certainly Judy. My daughter went to the University of Hartford, and she played under Jen Rosati during 2008 through 12, won a couple of championships. I must say, can I say it? Mm-hmm. She's been coaching 13 years. She just got her first head coaching job this season and took her underdogs all the way to the Women's Division I ECC championship game where she won. They won. And they're just down the road playing, and state starts today. So when I think about who we are, when I introduce myself, I'm not just a mother to the children that I gave birth to. I want to be, and I feel as though I'm a mother to every child. I have that mother's heart for our children, not just mine. But let me stay focused. I'm excited to share with you that our bodies are brilliant record keepers. The data that is stored in each of us is brilliant, and we can all learn from it. We remember the environments our families lived in, and when those environments were shaped by harmful policies, stress followed. Epigenetics helps explain those patterns, but it also reminds us that when environment improves, healing can follow. When we talk about epigenetics in indigenous communities, there's one thing I always want to make sure that I'm clear on, in that our bodies remembering what our families endured when systems failed to protect them, that remembering is not a weakness. It is biology responding to environment. And trauma is not our fault. Anyone, anywhere, globally, who has experienced trauma, I wish I could whisper, it is not your fault. Indigenous communities understood that stress, grief, and survival, they do not stop with one generation, do they? And for the Narragansett people, for sure, this conversation is not a hypothetical one. Our ancestral lands once encompassed what is known as Rhode Island, just shy 1 million acres of land. The Narragansett Tribal Reservation has been reduced to 1/4 of 1% of its ancestral lands. And if you know Nahagansak, it means the people of the point, the people of the shorelands. Close your eyes and just listen to this. For generations, my family lived with the rhythm of the water, fishing and harvesting, traveling, gathering along the coastline that sustained our communities. Mother Earth provided. Removal from shoreline access did not just change geography, it disrupted our food systems, our ceremonies, and economic stability, and certainly community cohesion. We believe that the real wealth is health. We know it to be true. Many are learning that. In 1880, the Narragansett Indian tribe was illegally detribalized. Our families were dispersed, and certainly our community was fractured. I have to take a moment because I cannot look at that image that I share with you up on the screen and not tell you that exquisite woman in the front is my mother. That's Red Doe. That is Diana Spears Mars, the eldest of 12. 6 girls and 6 boys. All the girls played piano right down the generational line, and all the boys play guitar. And she is followed by Tall Oak Whedon. I know many of you must know him if you follow Indigenous history, and his beautiful wife, Pat, and their first son. They are from the Wampanoag Nation. When you think about these communities and families and your own and all that that encompasses, could you imagine being told that you are no longer a people, no longer a community, that you no longer exist? When land is reduced and housing is restricted and communities are fragmented, chronic stress does not begin with an individual. It begins with policy. Policies shape environments, and environments shape health. Over time, that kind of stress, it can become normalized. And we see it. We see it in patterns of illness, parenting shaped by loss, bodies trained to stay alert and guarded and resilient all the time. Do you know, as hard as I try today in my current state of being, I'm always on a state of alert. I always have to be guarded. But I'm resilient. Resiliency is exhausting, you know. I'd like to take a day off. Science now helps explain some of these patterns. Chronic stress, as was shared by Bevan, can alter our cortisol regulation, increase inflammatory gene expression, and affect immune response. Do you know my mother fought and survived 3 different cancers before we lost her? And 5 of her 12 siblings died of the same type of cancer, tied back to environment. Social detriments of health. So health outcomes are not only shaped by medical care, they are shaped by the environment people are born into and the policies that shape those environments. Well, we certainly were not born into our current environment, right? Public health research refers to these influences as the social detriments of health, the environments in which people are either born or displaced into, grow, live, work, and raise their families. And these detriments include access to stable housing, clean water, nutritious foods, healthcare, education, supportive community, and networks or not. For many Indigenous communities, these conditions were not simply the circumstances that we were born into, they were shaped by policies that displaced people from their lands, disrupted food systems, and fractured community stability. Understanding that history helps explain why health patterns look the way that they do today. History teaches us. Health outcomes tend to improve when communities experience, when these conditions are stable and supportive, let me say, health outcomes tend to improve. But when communities experience the land loss, the environmental disruptions, health patterns shift with them. Health inequities rarely begin in hospitals. They begin in the conditions people live in long before you ever see a doctor. What we are observing in many Indigenous communities isn't a mystery. It's not a mystery. A lot of it is by design. It reflects the long-term health effects of environments shaped by policy decisions. From an epigenetic lens, chronic stress doesn't simply disappear. It can leave, and it does leave, biological markers, but those markers are not signs of deficiency. Hear me when I say that. They are signs of adaptation. We adapted to instability, scarcity, an environment shaped by dispossession and restriction. And this is where we must be careful. Science without context, it can become a tool of blame. If we look only at the biology, certain populations have higher rates of chronic diseases, don't they? Indigenous people has the highest rate of diabetes. We also see high blood pressure, kidney disease. At the top, the smallest population, but aren't we at the top of those lists? Without looking at the historical and policy conditions that shaped our environments, the story can quickly become, what is wrong with these communities? What is wrong with these people? Instead of asking the more accurate questions, what conditions produced these outcomes? When context is removed, responsibility shifts unfairly onto individuals. Can you already hear it? But when context is included, when we acknowledge the role of land loss, environmental disruption, chronic systemic stress, science becomes something very different. It becomes a pathway to understanding and accountability. It helps us see not just what happened in the body, but why. But why? Our bodies are not broken. They are removed from what naturally sustained them. And we had to adapt. The science of epigenetics shows adaptation, not damage. The body responds to stress to survive. The real question is not whether communities are broken. The real question is whether the environments shaping healthcare are supportive or are they harmful. And when environments improve, outcomes will improve. The real question is not whether communities are broken. My community, I trust you, is not broken. That is the hopeful part of this science. I retain and hold on to hope. I'll never lose it. That is the resilience that has been passed down, isn't it? It is in my DNA. Indigenous communities have already demonstrated that we have been resilient since time immemorial. We are not supposed to be here. I am only here because I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors. I have been carried forward through their prayers, and therefore I have a responsibility to share their story, their love, their passion, their welcoming to the stranger across the big wide ocean. When they saw that they couldn't survive, what did they do? They helped them learn how to survive. Healing does not come from asking individuals to simply be stronger. We're strong. Healing happens when structural conditions shift, when land and water, housing and healthcare access, not just that there's health care, but that you have access to it, and cultural safety are supported at systems level. Cultural safety, thus far, has been Bevan and I, thus far, being able to stand in your midst and say, Kanupium, Asko Wikwasan Nitops. Without loss of life, I could speak my Indigenous language without loss of life today. That is not lost on me, which is why I must do it. So we think, since these systems shaped biology, then systems also carry responsibility for healing. And I have a role in that responsibility, and I take it proudly. Public health research shows environment and chronic stress influence health outcomes. When those environments are shaped by policy decisions, acknowledging that context is not political, it is analytical. Understanding history allows us to design better solutions going forward. This is about accountability, not blame. We have future generations depending on us. History lives in the body, and epigenetics gives us language for something our communities have always known. I walk not alone because history lives in my body. My mother transitioned 3 years, it'll be April 11th, but she never left me. My father transitioned just this past August, in the middle of a laugh, telling us he was going to go see my mother in the garden. History lives in the body. That love that they instilled and had for each other, they passed down to all of us, but not just to share amongst us, to share with every human being I encounter. I don't care your background. You're my brothers and your sisters. We are connected on Mother Earth, and we're only going to survive on Mother Earth and pass it down to our children if we lean into that connection and see the value in each other. Forgive me. History lives in the body. It also reminds us of something hopeful. Just as trauma can be passed down, so can't healing. And that's the joy. You're seeing tears of joy that I'm trying to fight back so I can read my notes. We were blessed with the gift of joy, which is love, to be shared. It is not to be held and hidden. That is what we were taught. And we want to be able to share that healing so that all of our children, my grandchildren and theirs not yet born, can feel a sense of safety, stability, and cultural strength. I don't want to pass on to them that tenseness that I can't fully get rid of because of the world that I live in. I don't want that for our next several generations. I don't want it for my children, and I do not want it for yours. Epigenetic changes are often dynamic and responsive to environment change. When we change policies, environments, and the narratives, we don't just impact one generation. Our decisions will shape the next 7. We change what future bodies will remember. I want them to remember that they are safe, that they can feel secure, that they can feel supported by their fellow neighbors, by their fellow man. And this is where the conversation must move next. I was going to share with you, before I do this, the Narragansett tribal nation experienced what is known as the Great Swamp Massacre 350 years ago. In the middle of winter, a winter encampment where we had elderly and children and women with a few men trying to stay out of a conflict they wanted no part of, was massacred at that site. And when we think about strength and we think about resilience, there was those that survived. Aren't you glad they did? Because I would not be here before you today if they hadn't. We have gone back to that site as a nation for 350 years. My mother and father started going on their parents' hips and so on. I went every year for 6 decades on my mom's, right up to the last winter, my father's last winter. I am blessed to have 5 grandchildren who know of that site. We hold ceremony. We burn 3 fires, one for the past, and our elders speak to it. I'm considered an elder now. I don't know how that happened. We burn a second fire for the present, and my daughter's generation speaks to it, their hopes and their goals, what they aspire to. And we burn the third fire. It is that of our youth, young ones. And your children's age group would come up and they would speak to it. For 350 years, we celebrate the memory of those lost to us. We mourn those lost to us. We share love, grief, loss, and hope. 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 And this is where I'll pass it on to you, Cassandra, who will help us think through what systematic responsibility looks like in practice and how public health approaches can remove blame and build environments where healing is not the exception, but the expectation. Hope with me.
I'm Cassandra Toscano. I'm a West Hartford resident. I'm part of the Kootenai tribe, which is in British Columbia, Alberta, Idaho, Montana, that area. We also had a long migratory history for thousands of years in that area. Our tribe, I don't have my language to welcome you like Bevan and Heather did. We have an isolate language, and that means that it's not derived from any other language. It's its own language. And because of the dispersion that's happened with our tribe, very few people, who speak the language now. It was one of the languages that there were at one point like 12 native speakers that were left. And, it woke me up, about 10 years ago that I could be alive when my language dies. And so, I started to reconnect with my grandma and ask some more important questions about our heritage. She was one of the survivors of the Indian residential schools. And if you don't know about that, it's something to look into. It happened for 150 years in America. It happened for 100 years in Canada, where at the age of 5, you were taken from your families and kidnapped and put into a school. And horrible, horrible, horrible things happened. The last residential school shut down in the 80s. So it's not that long ago. We're not talking about ancient history. And so, when we talk about the trauma that's happened to Native families, and we could talk, so there's all these other talks we could have about the Indian residential schools or about the foster care system and how it separated, families for decades in the 60s here in the US. And so, the trauma is not so past. It's still pretty fresh in a lot of our contemporary families, and a lot of the policies that happen to either displace people from their homelands, a lot of it was really resulted in the dissolution of the family unit. And so a lot of our trauma is really about even having our families ripped away from us and then having no answers, right? So finding your cousins or, finding your aunts and uncles and then trying to get the truth. So my grandma, as a survivor of the the Indian residential schools, she didn't speak about that ever. Why would you speak about that, right? And so growing up, we just sort of didn't know why grandma didn't tell us much, right? And we didn't know why we weren't in contact with the tribe. We knew we were Native, and we were very proud that we were Native, but we wanted to respect her wishes. And it was just so traumatic for her to think about. The Indian residential school was in the town square, right? And so that means the whole community is a part of this. It's hard to go home when it's the whole community, the whole country that's doing that. My great uncle would talk about, he was 9 when he was in there, and one of the 9-year-old boys ran away, and they strung him up, they lynched him, and they showed the other boys what would happen to you if you run away from the school. So, I just use that as one example to help you understand the horrors that happened there. So it was really just recently when Canada started doing their Truth and Reconciliation Committee, when they started to have some reconciliation with the tribes, that all of this started to get documented and come out. And I will never forget, a few years ago, I remember it was a July early morning. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. And my grandma called me in the morning, and the news had just hit that her school had been sonared for the bodies in the backyard. And they had found 182 bodies in the backyard of her school. It was the 3rd school in Canada to be sonared. And she said to me, and she was crying, she was wailing, and I'd never heard my grandma cry, ever. And, she said to me, we knew they were there. We told people they were there, and they just told us that we were nothing but dirty, lying Indians. And so just this how scary that must have been to be a child, and to know that anyone at the hospital is actually dead and buried in the backyard because you didn't get medical treatment. You weren't good enough for medical treatment. So that is just in my immediate family. So I'm 2 generations removed from an Indian residential school. And so, I think it's important for us to just be aware of this. And I really appreciate you coming today and being curious about our cultures and what's been going on and what we're doing contemporarily to heal from it. So thank you for coming. I love nothing more than curiosity in our cultures and what we're doing today. So that's just a little bit about who I am. I'm also a healthcare executive, and I also want to say a small aside that statistically these 3 women should have high school degrees, right? And just to see like the level of advanced education in women, in Indigenous women, I'm just so tremendously proud of that too. So it's not lost on me. And so now that we've learned from Bevan and from Heather that our ancestors' experiences can be, and they are encoded in our DNA, what do we do with that information now, right? And that it will be passed on to multiple generations. And I want to broaden the scope a little bit too, because it's not just Indigenous people who have massive traumas in their background. And like Heather, I also have complex PTSD, and I work on it all the time, every day. And, it's not something that I want to pass on to, my generations as well. But, when people ask me about having PTSD, I just say I got my empathy early, and so it just means that I will understand anyone else who's gone through trauma or their families who have gone through trauma. And I love that. That is the gift that it's given me. And so, as we think and broaden the scope, and we think about Black Americans, and we think about Spanish Americans, Mexican Americans, and things that are happening, to them right now, we think about America as a whole. We are either the people who lived here or the people who emigrated here. All came for a reason, because something was happening in their homeland, right? That's the entire story of America. And so I think it's important, particularly in this America, 250th birthday, and to think about the beautiful collection of histories that comes together for us as a country. This is such a timely concept to include everybody in. So we've observed this phenomena now across multiple species. There's multiple labs that are doing this research ongoing, and including in humans. I will say that it's well documented that it's happening. We know it's through the methylated DNA. We don't know exactly how it's happening through the methylated DNA. So that's going to be like the next part of the research. But as you continue to see studies, now you'll know how to put it into context as you've learned about this. But we do know that there's widespread documentation that it does happen, that we are encoding the environment onto our DNA. We know that it can be trauma-induced, like the mice. It can be through man-made experiences like war and famines. Like the Dutch that we saw. We know that the victims of the Holocaust, that any of their descendants, they're more likely to have anxiety coming out of the Holocaust. And we see for these entire subpopulations, like our Native populations, like Black Americans, through the loss of our family and our homelands, through slavery, we see that we have a disproportional rate of conditions that come out of an underlying how our metabolism has changed, and how stress affects the body, and it's there genetically and passed on to our descendants. I think it was really important what Heather said, that you have to keep into context, or if you see this, you say, oh, there's something wrong here. And I think it was really important what you said, which is, what happened to this group of people that they would, at a wholesale level, have a higher rate of diabetes, hypertension, cardiac issues. I think there are other nations I can think of, because as I know about different prevalence in other nations of diabetes, kidney disease, et cetera, that this will probably come out. They just probably haven't been studied yet. But we've seen it for diabetes, obesity, cardiac disease, anxiety, and schizophrenia. So that's really interesting, right? So as we start to think about behavioral health conditions too. The other thing that I swear we didn't coordinate on this, but in the original mice studies that happened, the effect lasted 7 generations. And as a Native American, and we think in terms of 7 generations, that was not lost on me. That it scientifically confirmed something that how we behave and is internalized in our thinking. And I want to share with you, like, how long is 7 generations, right? So I want you to kind of think about that. So if you met your great-grandparents, right, or had the opportunity to meet your great-grandparents, and if you meet your great-grandchildren, that's 7 generations. So that's not that far, right? You can imagine your great-grandparents and you can imagine your great-grandchildren. And so the experiences that your ancestors went through, your great-grandparents are affecting your great-grandchildren. That's easy to imagine when you think of it like that, right? And it's easier for me to understand when I think about it in terms of generations than think about it and to think about it as my grandma or my great-grandma versus the time spans within which a war happened or a famine happened, right? So to give you a sense of that, the Holocaust is 1 to 3 generations away for different people. That's not that far. Slavery is similarly like 2 to 3 generations away for people. I'm 2 generations away from Indian residential schools. The Irish potato famine, where like most of the Irish came over, is about 5 generations away. So it's really a lot of the immigration to America. So specifically as a country, if we think about policy, we would be disproportionately impacted by epigenetics. We have other challenges as a country to think about, like the size of the country, just the geography, sheer size, the size of our population, our multiple cultures and languages that we have as a country. But that shouldn't prevent us from tackling the things that we know that work that can improve health for our country. And it would apply to Native people as well, but we also can't do it alone. We have to do this all together. So we know what the interventions are that help in reducing elevated stress. We know what helps with trauma. We know what can help people heal their communities. So I'll share some of those with you. And I want to say that we've known these things. We've known them through social sciences. We've known them through other scientific discoveries, the social determinants of health, the NIH, the CDC. We've known these solutions for a very long time. You can get to these solutions through empathy, just like being a good human. Or you can take this science and do the math and get to the same solution, right? And so these things are not unknown to us, but maybe sometimes we don't always exercise our empathy side as much as a country, I would say. And so this just gives us the science and the math to bring it all together. And that's why I care so much about epigenetics. So if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you just start basic. Think about physical safety. That's one of the primary things that people want in their communities. Access to affordable housing. So if you think about for all types of biased against type of subpopulations, access to medicine. That is a common thing that humans want. And when we get sick, we want access to medicine. If you branch into trauma-informed care, you want access to behavioral health resources, medicines, programs, trauma-informed medical care. And if you branch into the specific conditions that epigenetics is causing, like obesity, diabetes, cardiac, anxiety, we want regular and routine access to good maternity care everywhere. Hypertension and diabetes can seriously impact birth outcomes in the country, and it does. 35% of counties in the United States today are maternity deserts. That means there's not a birthing facility and there's not an OBGYN in that county. In 35% of the United States, the richest country in the history of the world. We want access to whole foods. You have to think about how many food deserts there are in the country. The entire Bronx in New York City is a food desert. You can't get to a grocery store, like a normal grocery store. People are buying from bodegas, right? People are buying in Texas. You know, one of the most common places people get groceries is the dollar store. They don't have a lot of produce at the dollar store, right? And so access to whole foods. And then access to education and health literacy, equal access to education, right? And that's something that we've lost as a Native society, is a lot of those opportunities. But man, I feel it coming back in this generation. You know, it's coming back strong. I'll tell you, I went to grad school at Yale, and when I went there, and my grandma who is Native on my side, on my mother's side. She is smart as a whip. She's 95 years old, and she is still today she's never lost her wit and her humor, and she's so smart. And when I got into Yale, it's gonna touch me. So she said to me, "I knew I was always that smart. I knew it, and now you just proved it for me." And I'm like, "That's right, Grandma. I'm clear where I come from." So, and she was someone that left the residential school at 14 because it was so abusive, so she didn't get her high school diploma, right? And so those are the impacts of the policies that happened for our people and for my grandma. And so eventually she got her GED, and that was wildly important to her, right? But that wasn't her innate ability. That was the opportunity that was given to her, and the more that each generation has been resilient and come back, you know, there's a lot of grad degrees in my generation, you know, and we were always the same level of smart, right? So equal access to education and health literacy. Instead, for these subpopulations that have been prejudiced against, we have historical laws, regulations, initiatives that have moved these subpopulations more commonly into less access for affordable housing, housing disparity, redlining districts, right? Unsupported reservations. There's a lot of why water is diverted away from reservations, and it's like, no, like every human has access to they need access to clean water. Food deserts. These subpopulations are in maternity deserts, behavioral health deserts, and we could do a whole talk on medical trauma for these subpopulations, how Black Americans were used to experiment on, forced sterilization for Native women. We could do a whole talk just on that. Today, the American Indian, and this is from the NIH, the American Indian and Alaska Native people have long experienced lower health status when compared to other Americans. And today, American Indians and Alaska Natives born have a life expectancy that is 5.5 years less than the US all races population. That's today, because of how the trauma is living in our body, our disease prevalence, and then the continued policies that have kept us outside of getting the additional help. So while you can get to those interventions, the clean access to water, affordable housing, equal access to maternal health, equal access to health, you can get there through empathy. It hasn't been happening. The opposite has been happening. And so if we truly took a scientific approach and a population health approach, we would remove the blame and the shame on individuals for inheriting these conditions, the way their bodies metabolize, that their ancestors were traumatized, and give them more access to the interventions that we already know work. That's why I think epigenetics is really important. Healthcare is a lot about inheritance. It's a lot about DNA, no matter who you are, and then it's about geography, zip codes, and social factors. So then we as neighbors and citizens and society, we have the information, and we're getting more science and more mathematics, how we can unbiasedly apply the right resources and the right amount of supply of these resources in the right culturally concordant way, we can apply them to the right level of demand. This population just has a higher need. So we know what works and we know how to give it to them. And right now it's an imbalance in exactly the opposite direction. So we need to disproportionately give them to all of these subpopulations who've been denied it. So thank you very much for coming.
And we can just open up to anybody who wants to start. That's always the hardest, the first question.
And I would encourage, if you don't have a question for us, if something resonated with you in your own background, we'd love to hear about that too.
Yes. First of all, thank all of you. Your words, your honesty and ability to share some very personal and heart-wrenching but inspirational and informational remarks resonated with me particularly because we share a lot of common history, ethnically speaking and religiously speaking. And I just wanted to say thank you because I was telling Judy, I don't know what's going on, but I think this is a good thing because the last week I have attended or listened to more group gatherings where people are talking about the commonalities between us as human beings that we need to remember that we have. And a lot of that is about remembering that through the environment and the way we live and the access and to opportunities and the inability to achieve them in many communities is not our fault, but we can all have empathy and work hard every day in all our relationships to make us all healthy and well and therefore a better place.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail.
Thank you.
I want to add, Gail's also on the committee to organize programming for the 250th birthday.
Perfect.
It's not totally formed, so it's perfectly here. You mentioned, obviously, loss of land, access to safe water, what passes through our genes because of not feeling safe and secure and getting those signals of stress. And you also talked about policies that created those, the environments in which we had to deal with. What wasn't mentioned is the reality that those policies were created by white people in a space that they were kind of living based on the fallacy of white supremacy and inflicting their own values and ideas on the people around them that had negative outcomes. I'm curious as to how some of the work you're doing interacts and crosses kind of white supremacy and what policies you're potentially targeting, maybe not specifically, but maybe not nationally, but locally, if there are certain policies or laws that you're looking to change or create to help move forward the concepts and of healing that you've all referenced.
Thank you for your very important and insightful question. I appreciate that. When you started, I think of a lot of the experiences that we have all gone through, whether it's us at this table or many of you out in the audience, or people that you know, different groups of populations. I know for me, I experienced what you would call a soul wound. My soul has been wounded. The souls of my ancestors have been wounded. We have experienced victimization. I will not be a victim. I will not be a victim. I have experienced harm. My ancestors have, and that we know have been passed down. And so because of that, my soul speaks to me, and I feel a sense of responsibility to listen, to be still, to try to understand what can I do, what is within my control to help impact that DNA being passed down to the future generations. And so for me, it's been getting involved locally, community, first within my home, because we need a safe place to begin, don't we? Bouncing ideas off. And I grew up in that type of environment. I watched my mother and father do that with the community, in the living rooms, in our church, our community church that was burned down not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it was rebuilt not once, not twice, but 3 times. Do you see who I come from? We had a school on the reservation, which was then burnt down, and we were not allowed to rebuild that. So I saw with my eyes action being taken with those in my community, my family members, extended family members, friends of the tribe that were not from the tribe, good neighbors, good human beings. And so current day, working in what happens to be a leadership position now through tribal government, but certainly my work started long before that. I think I've served my tribe in this capacity over 16 years. I think the first was a 8-year stint, and then took a break due to health reasons, and my community has called me back to serve, which I do. But whether I'm in that capacity or not, I will always serve my community and my fellow neighbors. I work with a group in Rhode Island, the CRMC. I work with many different groups, I shouldn't call out just one, where we're building relationships and we're asking to have a seat at the table, not after the fact, during the initial conversations. I, with others, am actively working toward access to water. Could you believe that in 2024, there had to be a town meeting, several of them over months, to decide if Indigenous people could have access to the ocean? Could you believe that? In Rhode Island. And we went as a community, and we earned that. But it doesn't stop there. I can't, my youngest grandchild will be the only grandchild that I do not have access to bring down to a local water hole where we dive for quahogs and make my mother's chowder, and we get fresh quahogs. We no longer have access. So those are the things that we are doing on a policy level with our friends in the state, with our friends in the town. Not every place is friendly, but that doesn't mean that we will stop being. And it doesn't mean that we won't stop trying to build those relationships and build trust and show that we are resilient. And it doesn't just impact our community, it impacts the whole community. We are connected. Mother Earth needs us together, and those are just some things that I'm doing.
I appreciate the bravery of your question.
Yes.
I would say I've been doing a couple of things. One is the more I learn, the more I learn about Indigenous history, my family's, the more I learn about Black American history, the more I learn about just anybody's history, I feel like that makes everybody human to me, right? And so I've been trying to learn as much as I can. And even as I learn more about my Indigenous history, I feel closer to the Black American experience than I've ever felt. So I hope you welcome me in. So, because we have less numbers than you guys. So they almost got us. So, so I just feel like because our numbers are so low that I feel like I want to be included in other populations that are trying to do the same thing. I do see like it's across humanity, it's across Mother Earth, and so with your question about white supremacy, it makes me think about, so when most of what I think about in terms of reform is, well, not most, but I have a lot of connection to the Indian residential school because of our family history. And so when we were looking at that in the United States, and why we started that policy in the United States, why Congress approved it, was because it was cheaper than war to get the reservations back. So it's literally there. It was cheaper than war, right? They wanted the land back, even after giving us this much land, right? So they said, okay, so the next thing is to assimilate the children, take away the culture, and that will be cheaper than war. And that's just like so inhumane to me to think about people, you know? So, and that is back in the 1800s when that was signed in. But I purposefully included the Irish potato famine today. And that was on purpose because there are, you know, I'm mixed, you know, so I have a mix of my native side, and then my dad's side is 4th generation pre-Alamo Texans. You know, we're like cowboys and Indians, like all right in here. And so I have to understand their struggle as well and like where they came from. We have quite a mix of religion, politics, and ethnicity in my family. And I think just because of that, I try to listen harder. Like, where do we connect on? Where do we agree on? Where can I ignore, you know, that and it's not really harmful to others? And let people have their own experience. But the more I do that, I feel more connected to the majority of people today, you know, and I think that the loud people get a lot of hang time, right, in like the press and things like that. So I think the more we can actually come together in person and get to know people, and so that's also why I do these things. I try to be brave and tell my stories, tell you I have PTSD. You know, I've had that used against me in the past, you know, people throwing that back at me. And I still do it, you know, because I want to show you it's okay to be brave. It's okay to be not ashamed. It's okay to incorporate all your lived experience. And it's okay to try to connect with someone and see if they can connect back to you. And that's what I'm trying to do. I think the only other policy thing is, I forget which organization is trying to do it, which is they're trying to redo the K through 12 education on
Connecticut State.
Connecticut State.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure as a town, we're part of the Town Equity Council, that we get a look at that before that goes into the K through 12 schools.
So to answer your question for me, I am thrice displaced. My family's from Mississippi and Tennessee originally, then moved to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. During relocation, my family was moved from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl era to California, and I have since moved all the way across country to Connecticut. I have no community of my own community here. I've built a community with the people here, all of you. I disrupt with education. I just recently finished my dissertation on Indigenous perspectives of resilience and survivance in higher education. I'm displacing or disrupting that by doing showing a non-Western academic lens, which is not very widely seen. And so my goal is to educate people, and I use my degree and I use my perspectives to educate students at the university, whether they're in my Native American Cultures class or another class. I share my perspectives. And with all the work I'm doing at the University of Hartford and also here in West Hartford in the greater Connecticut community, I think that teaching this next generation is my path of being an activist and showing a different lens other than the Western colonial lens that we've been forced down our throats for the past 3 or 4 generations. Any other questions?
Bevan, could I just add one last piece? I didn't want to lose sight of this. The beauty of being a sovereign nation is that we have the right to self-identify. I love to say, Nutatuis, Nishwi, Kwani Kawesa, Kitampanisha. Before I say Heather Angel, we have the right to self-identify. So when we are asked to assimilate, we stand in a day where we can stand in our truth and I am still your loving neighbor, it doesn't mean that has to be a negative. It means that I would like to live out loud and proud in my own being, in my own soul, and accept you and yours. So when you talk about white supremacy, the Western world, or assimilation, right? We know it exists. We know it's there. We also know it's not going anywhere anytime soon. But I do not have to lose myself, my true self, to something that's evil, hurtful, hateful, and destructive. You know what I do? I do what I witnessed. I pray. I turn to Creator, and I ask Him to be that source of strength when I, in my human self, am weak. I lean into my spirituality to survive it. And I do that because I know that we are all connected. And there is more that each of us share that will connect us than will ever divide us. And I refuse to buy into the lie of division. Refuse to. And I hope you do too.
Thank you for all the speeches that everyone gave. I definitely do feel the trauma that all of you have experienced, and I've been reading different things about that. There's another movement that's led by a Native American. His name is Dane Wigington. He is trying to stop geoengineering, which is happening worldwide. And with that issue, for people that aren't familiar, basically, we are in climate collapse. It's not climate change.
I do think that the point I want to make is that we don't know, I think from some other man-made things that are going on, like PFAS chemicals, right? Those are hormone disruptors. And so I don't think we totally appreciate some of the biological disruption that we're continuing to do right now, and we will need to continue to evaluate, I think, how that's affecting generations too. That's how I would answer that.
Yeah, the water scarcity is a huge problem, especially in the West. I lived in the West for a good chunk, a third of my life. Originally from Los Angeles, lived in Texas and Arizona, was in community with the Pima Reservation there and the Navajo Reservation a lot. So they're fighting for just basic water needs. All the way down the Colorado River, it's impacting tribes left, right, and center. And towns like, or cities like Las Vegas are sucking up all the water and leaving none for anybody else. You know, and the Mexicans, who are also indigenous, are also fighting for those rights because they should have rights to the Colorado River and the Gila and to the Rio Grande, and they're being denied access as well by colonialism. And you know, they keep fighting these legal battles and they keep getting denied, which is really, really sad to see. But hopefully, you know, if we can inform enough people and advocate, we can help advocate on their behalf and spread the message that this is perpetuating. Other questions? Right here.
Just to add that the other thing that gobbles up water, especially in Texas, is AI.
Oh,
data
yeah,
centers
yeah.
are there.
The data centers are gobbling up lots of water, lots of other resources as well. My son was telling me yesterday, I think it was, that the cost of RAM for your computer has gone up like 600% in the past year alone. And like a stick of RAM, we used to cost like $50, is now like $500. I was just like, oh my God. Yes.
So I hear a lot of you talking about the displacement. So a question is, when I see the reservations, I'm Cherokee Nation, Oklahoma, so we have districts. We don't necessarily have a reservation, but I see these very small outlines of reservations. And I wonder that those borders were created at a certain population. How does the tribe think about, or how does it affect health when those borders don't change, but the populations increase?
So I think that's a great question. So my tribe, the Ktunaxa, because we had our isolate language, the British government in Canada thought we were just difficult, and because they didn't have a translator for us. So and we have documentation, how difficult we were, and so because of that, they stopped negotiations with my tribe, and we don't have a single reservation either. They came and they just did 9. They just gave us the land around 9 winter encampments. So it was just like 9 disparate places based on the acreage they thought we deserved, right? And so this was.
Where did the new children settle to become part of the tribe?
Yeah, and so our tribe for the longest time didn't even accept it because it was like, what is this? Like, this is just where we were for winter, right? and people were doing different things. So at one point, our chief actually got trapped, and even the international line didn't sort of make sense to us because we had for thousands of years just gone on our migratory patterns. When they were started to enforce the reserves and then the international line, our chief got trapped on the U.S. side, and then he had to have someone write like a letter of like recommendation for him to even get back to his tribe. And so we have the letter. It's like, Edward is a good Indian. Let him back. He has 2 cows and like 2 horses. Like, it's just so ridiculous. Like it's just beyond. And so, I think you're right. Like the situations that resulted in that land were not meaningful to like where we were originally from. They weren't meaningful to our way of life. They weren't at the shore, right? But I think now, from what I hear, right, is first of all, a lot of us don't live on the reservations or reserves or districts anymore. But it is a homeland for keeping the culture in place. And so I still, even though we have no way of really changing, I think the lines that have been drawn, I think we're starting to embrace it as, we didn't want it, but this is where we can have our culture the way we want to have the culture.
I will just add to that, and thank you for sharing. I could sit and listen to these ladies all day long, as I'm sure you could, the stories. I wanted to share at least my lived experience with the Narragansett tribal nation, going from about 1 million acres, that was your territory, to reduce to 1,800 acres, and not a part of it is along the shoreline. Those 1,800 acres that were returned like a checkerboard. It wasn't contiguous, and that was by design and by policy to ensure the disruption and fragmentation of community. It was also by design that when those lands were given, that at no point in time ever could you come back for more.
Mm-hmm.
And that the population of the tribal nation at that time was 1,188 individuals. Now these weren't truly all of our members, because remember, many were displaced.
Mm-hmm.
And lost to the area and to their family. But they counted 1,188, never to increase. So then the treaty with the federal government is that through Indian Health Services, for example, the clinic, we will receive funds for 1,188 individuals forever. Our population is not 1,188 people. But this is what Indian tribes, this is what indigenous tribes across the country has been left with. So we can't even build a home on what they want to call a reservation that's technically not even a reservation. We can't even build a school without it being burned down, or a church. But this is what we do. We have our annual, what we call our August meeting. Many people know them as powwows. Mm-hmm. We hold our ceremonies all throughout the year. All throughout the year, the ceremonies that are rich and dear and deep to our culture. We have community events on those lands. We do hunting on those lands. There's a pond that I believe the state says that they have the eminent domain of the water, but we can have the land overneath, so they have access through. But those 1,800 acres, to us, they're our ancestral, part of our ancestral lands. Only 2 acres that have never been lost to our tribe, ever, ever, ever. Only 2. But they mean everything. It's home. It's a place. It's for our children. Global. We have children across the globe, across the country. It's home. And we'll make the most of it. And we won't stop fighting the policy, but that's the lived experience today.
Other questions? Okay.
So I took the Native American culture class at the University of Hartford last semester. So I got to learn a lot about the Native Americans and the history and everything. I also have ancestry from my dad's side with the Blackfoot tribe. And I wanted to ask about like maybe how there are like what ways are there to like unlock those books in the library of epigenetics, especially for like me and also my partner who has Hawaiian heritage but hasn't been able to learn a whole lot about it yet.
So there's a lot of research out there from IHS and other agencies like the CDC. So I would start with research and then maybe start reaching out to tribal members to see what's going on in their particular area of the world and if there's anything that could possibly affect you as well. You know, knowing what your ancestors have faced or even distant family members can help unlock some of your own mysteries. Would you guys add anything?
I think right now, since a lot of the underlying disease has to do with your stress response system, so you know, dealing with that, it helps your underlying health tremendously, right? So I think anything around
Mental health.
Yeah, mental health, anything around PTSD. They're just coping strategies to help bring your cortisol level just down, right? So, you know, I've worked with professionals that have helped me with different techniques and stuff like that, and it's incredibly grounding techniques are really helpful. It just, your body will automatically respond with just, you know, like you were saying, it automatically does some things that you're not aware that it's doing. So the more that I think you can learn about that, that's helpful in terms of the epigenetics piece of it. In terms of the cultural heritage piece of it, I agree. I think the most I've learned is a lot of tribes actually have like Facebook pages now and
Websites.
Yeah, websites. And so like you're learning about webinars they're putting on, free language classes, and then you meet people and then you start talking and then you start getting connected to. I've had a very friendly experience through that. Yeah.
Even if it's not in that community, you could have community here.
Yeah.
Because I have community with these ladies.
Yeah.
And they're not my tribal members, but we share a somewhat lived experience. And so I have found community here in the greater Hartford area with these ladies. So finding those people to have community with is important. I go through therapy myself for chronic stress and PTSD and all the fun things. I have found that my therapist is really good at helping me to a certain point, but I might want to start looking for somebody who's a trauma-informed therapist in Indigenous populations to help me with some of those intergenerational traumatic responses.
Hi, everyone. I really enjoyed your
Can you
talk.
put the microphone? Is it on?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
So I'm doing a 6-part series on American architecture, and I'm obsessed with architecture. Okay, so as I'm doing this series, I'm like, wait a minute, I have to do Native American architecture. Like, that's American, and it's the first one. So I fell into this giant rabbit hole of Native American architecture, and along the way, I found out that my 9th great grandfather was King Philip.
Oh wow.
For
We were just
starters.
talking about that.
Yeah. So the people I've met have just been incredible. But what I wanted to ask from you ladies is, do you guys know anything about the architecture in your tribes?
So a lot of Cherokee people lived in like log cabin type residences, if you will, longhouses. They were, you know, at least in Tennessee and North Carolina, they looked like log cabins kind of. Up here, I think they lived in mostly wigwams. I'm not sure what your tribe mostly lived in. Teepees if
We're
they were traveling.
Yeah, we're nomadic. We're mostly teepees.
When you were traveling, but did you guys have permanent residences?
I think teepees, yeah.
Just still. So it varies from tribe to tribe across the country and what region you're in, what was more appropriate. You know, I know the Seminoles, for example, in Florida, they live in huts on stilts. And because it's very hot and humid, you know, they were more open to the elements. So it all depends on where your family is from originally.
That's what I found too, like, you know, some people build their homes into the earth.
Mound builders, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and so it was kind of like whatever you had.
That was mostly like
resources.
southern plains area, Mississippi up through like Arkansas area, Missouri. There are some like in the Great Basin area that actually dug holes into the earth and have them like in like subterranean type
Coolness.
That
Yeah,
makes a lot of
cool.
sense because
Yeah.
you have a moderate temperature if you're underground.
Yeah.
But what I will say, because I'm obsessed with architecture too, I love it. What I find myself attracted to, though, at just my eye, is places that have incorporated the land around it. So like falling water, or you know, things like that. Like it's interesting in a contemporary way. Like I can appreciate the same thing in another architect, you know. But all of the stuff we're doing is because of the culture. Right, right. So whatever that tribe's need was, you know, but it was all about becoming one with the land. I will tell you one of the things that similar but different. My grandma always spoke about bears just like as brothers and sisters and things like that, and I sort of didn't get it for like a really long time. But she really did. They were part of the family. And I didn't get it until my daughter was born, and she started naming the trees in the backyard. I love that. And so we have Elizabeth and Harper in the backyard, and
That's crazy. I name all my trees.
yeah, and it just stuck with me that like she really cared about them. She loved them, still loves them, and like I realized that. I finally understood what my grandma was saying, because we are the stewards of the grizzly bear in the Canadian Rockies. That's why she was so attached to bears. And also, like in our tribe, bears carry medicine, you know, they have the strength to carry medicine for people who are sick. And so I just sort of it just locked in once she started doing it, that, gosh, if we kind of thought of ourselves related to the land and the animals and everything, we probably wouldn't be destroying it as fast if you were like cutting down Harper, right? Like versus like an unnamed tree. Yeah.
We have a tree at our house, and during the storm, we wrapped a chain around it because it split.
Oh, yeah.
And the chain grew into the tree.
Oh.
So we call it Alice in Chains.
This gentleman right here.
I've enjoyed your conversation very much, but to answer your question, early in my career, I used to help archaeology people. And I can tell you that from the Susquehanna River, near where Harrisburg is, north was the Iroquois Nation. And the Iroquois Nation, what we found, which actually where 3 Mile Island is that we dug up a cornfield, and we found that basically, I would say from Pennsylvania north, is they had long huts. Because what we found is that when we scrape the soil, because once you put stuff in the soil, it's forever disturbed. And we did find a couple of burial grounds, but over and above that, you found along the river, Susquehanna River, you dug it up and you see these probably, I would say 50 to 80 feet long by 14 feet wide, and you see post-smoke patterns. And the carbon-14 was 13th century. So that was going on long before, the white man came, or even maybe the guys came from Scandinavia. So, and we found that in further archaeology studies going up to probably Massachusetts, upstate New York, and Connecticut and all of that, and further, places that we explored, you had long homes as far as the architecture goes. So, that's an observation.
Thank you.
And I think this lady right here.
Just to comment that I've spent some time in the Four Corner area, and what the ancestral Pueblo people do with stone is just,
They build these wonderful
amazing.
Pueblo structures into the cliffs of the canyons, and they're like 3 or 4 stories tall, and they're made of mud, this mud called caliche, and straw and things, and it keeps the houses cold in the summer and warm in the winter. It's really amazing feat of architecture.
And what's still there in places like Chaco, and it's amazing.
It is.
And just to continue your research, coincidentally, Bevan and I just connected with an alum from University of Hartford who's from Crow Nation, and he now lives in Santa Fe. So he went to University of Hartford and did an architecture engineering joint degree. And he's doing a lot of work with architecture, bringing indigenous, knowledge into his architectural work. So his name is Joseph Kunkel, Kunkel. And if you Google him, you'll read a little bit more about what he's doing. It's really fascinating.
Other
Yeah,
questions?
one more question, maybe?
This lady right here.
My son and daughter-in-law moved to Albany, New York, to be part of a community there. And then they decided they wanted to start a farm. They both had done some farming. So they bought some land that they could afford in a small town outside of Albany that had been used for logging. And there was nothing on it. They had to start from scratch, and the soil was no good, but they could afford it, and they knew how to nourish soil. They found out that the land had belonged originally to the Mohican tribe, and the majority of those had been displaced, I think, to Wisconsin. But there was a small band of Mohican tribe members in Stockbridge, and they reached out to them, and they developed a long-standing relationship. At first, they wanted to give them some of the land, but the tribal members didn't want the land. They didn't want to own it. But they've developed a contract in which the Mohican tribe has access in perpetuity to the land for ceremony, for growing food. The farm itself is hosting, growing some of their indigenous seeds, and then giving them the seeds. There's a Buddhist peace pagoda near where the farm is, and there was a big dispute about 250 acres of land that also had been part of the Mohican tribe. And it took many years and many people in the Albany, Troy, Hudson Valley community to win giving that 250 acres back to the Mohican tribe. That happened just recently.
Thank you for sharing that. Land back.
Absolutely.
Land back.
It's a big movement right now. There's
Yes.
recently just been a return of a large tract of land to one of the tribes in California and also in Maine as well.
And I just wanted to share, I shared with you about the massacre, the Great Swamp Massacre in Rhode Island. And after 347 years, land back came back to the Narragansett Tribal Nation, where we hold our ceremony. And I was standing out there, and I don't know why Creator had me at this point in time in my life to be standing there in that space when that land came back. But I can tell you how profound, and how I talked about soul wounds. That was soul healing. It was soul healing. So thank you for sharing that story. I know how incredibly important that was for that population and for many across the country. And if I could say to your young daughter who names the trees, my grandson at 3 years old, he's 6 now, he said he calls me Amma. Amma, do trees talk? And I knew from my elders that yes, they certainly do. And they let us know of the seasons that are coming and going. They let us know when they're healthy. They let us know when food is abundant. Watch the squirrels. Our ancestors, our living relatives, the animals, the trees, the plants, the water, they all talk. And I'm glad you're naming your friends.
I just also wanted to say thank you, and I think that's going to be the way. You know, like we all want to make these big policy changes, et cetera,
Yes.
but I actually think it's neighborly changes that is how we will heal.
Absolutely.
Like, how can we be neighborly and understand each other, and is there anything in my power that I can do to make something better for someone else?
Return
Thank
to
you so much,
humanity.
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. On behalf of the panel and the library, thank you so much for coming out today and spending part of your Saturday afternoon with us. And we hope you'll keep an eye out for future events. Thank you.
Thank you.